Okay, part two. Uh, Dead Rising. Dead Rising's gameplay is split up into a few things. Now, everyone who's played the game knows already what I'm talking about. But I'm just going to try to break down the best I can. To people who haven't played the game, I'm going to try to break things down the best I can. Try to do a little more research if you're interested. It's kind of hard to, I don't want to talk forever and ever, try to flesh all this stuff out, because it's going to take forever, but as I tried to do already with Frank West's character, and I've already covered some of these things in part one. But, basically, we'll start with number one part of the game, the wandering around the mall. Yes, you're trapped in a mall. If you didn't catch me saying that before, maybe I didn't say it before. You're trapped in a mall full of zombies. And it's sandbox gameplay similar to that of Grand Theft Auto, but Grand Theft Auto never let you pick up tons of random objects lying around the place and smash people with them. You always had set weapons, set things, and so things aren't concrete, which adds even more a larger sense of choice to the gameplay. And so, I personally can't think of any other game that does that. Sure, they've had set pieces where you can pick it up and integrate it with it, but not to the level Dead Rising did. Dead Rising was very much more of a survival horror game, at least in the survival aspects, than any game I've seen almost ever. Not so much the horror aspects, but I'll get into that later. Because Dead Rising is a survival horror game, but it's a comedy. Get over that. The sandbox aspect of the game is meant to replicate survival on the fly. It is meant to integrate the fact that, oh hey, I have to use what's around me in my environment to fend off what is trying to kill me with what is around me. I am trying to survive. Now, granted, my prey isn't that difficult to kill, but there's a hell of a lot of them. And that's part of what makes Dead Rising gameplay fun, is that trying to find these weapons, seeing around, how much fun it is trying to figure out how to kill them. That was the thing about Dead Rising. The game is just a shit ton of fun. It's fun, but yet it still gets your blood pumping with your weapon breaking. I've heard so many people on the internet complain how quickly your weapon breaks. But think about it. If you're bashing 50 zombies with one weapon, you're hitting 50 people with that thing. You think it's gonna last that long? Granted, it might last longer than, what it says in the game, but, metal pipes might last a little longer than that. But it adds an aspect of, oh crap, it adds to the survival aspect of things. If they just give you a sword, and you're able to hold on to it and kill 200 zombies with the damn thing, that kills away some of the survival aspects of the game, which is part of the roots that it's going for. And so, remembering that the game is meant to be in root in survival horror. Remember, Capcom invented Resident Evil, the game that one of my personal favorite franchises, and the game that didn't invent survival horror, but actually made it a genre. The game that invented it was Alone in the Dark, but Alone in the Dark just didn't coin the term, it doesn't get the word it deserves. Resident Evil usually gets the credit for starting survival horror, but Alone in the Dark really didn't establish the genre, traits that there is today, and didn't establish it as a series. So, touching on that, Dead Rising, first of all, is a sandbox survival horror game. An evolution of survival horror. Now, the comedy aspects. the game is hilarious. Not only in the way you can kill the zombies, but the environment and the ironic environment it puts you in. It puts you in a shopping mall. And there's this... the music of the game is just mall music. Slight little... doon 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 doon. Just generic, cheap music that you would hear when you're in a mall. And that's part of what makes it funny, is the fact that it's realistic. And it's light and cheery and completely the opposite of what we think of when we think of zombie apocalypse. But that's what our environment would really be like if you were stuck in a mall in a zombie apocalypse. There wouldn't be horrific music going on. And so that's what disturbed me, is that I read in some blog about someone comparing Dead Rising to Left 4 Dead, and I just about lost it. And that Left 4 Dead has very intense music, and it increases the sense of dread. Yeah, that's Left 4 Dead. That's a co-op first-person shooter that's nothing like Dead Rising. And it astonished me is that if Dead Rising embraced horror music, I would disown it. It's part of what makes the game is the hilarious ways you kill zombies and the very ironic feeling of everything. And so that brings us to the point where the comedy and the horror meet together, and with possibly is one of another big innovation in Dead Rising's gameplay is the psychopaths. Anyone who's played the game, they're the game's version of bosses, and they're people who are so selfish and so absorbed in themselves that during the zombie apocalypse they take on these sense forms of greed, or like these huge exaggerated feelings of self. Like, there's a grocery store owner who comes obsessed with people vandalizing his store. There's a clown who's obsessed with entertaining kids with his chainsaws and says that you're ruining his party. There's all these other, play the game. That I don't want to give too many other ones away because they're the most fun part of Dead Rising from a story standpoint. And they're so interesting to look at, and they're another huge, unique part of Dead Rising, and help add to its character and its humor, and interesting full-on themes. And they're very much present in 2, as I've seen, and definitely a major part. Okay, last part of Dead Rising to push its innovation. The clock. The 72-hour clock. It's not actually 72 hours, it's a game clock. So I can't remember the exact time on it, but it's a shorter amount of time. This clock system is used to add pressure to the player, and add another dimension to the survival horror aspects of it. Once again, this game's an evolution of survival horror. I very much see Dead Rising as that. But in the opposite way, Resident Evil evolved. If Dead Rising is indeed a spiritual sequel to Resident Evil in another aspect, let's say if Dead Rising's original concepts were actually made for a Resident Evil game, I would not be surprised at all. I guess, Koji Inafune, who's not big in... He's a producer at Capcom, so he has part in the Resident Evil development process, but I know he wasn't really involved real closely with the earlier Resident Evil games, but I wouldn't be surprised if some of the ideas for the game came from a Resident Evil document. And that's not just because of zombies, that's actually because of other things. But back to the clock, and I'm going to have to make another part, but the clock, I will continue on next part.